Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Andrzejewski. I work for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services as one of their senior cybersecurity engineers. And here I'm going to talk about how to exercise your SOC. This is a concept we came up with internally about 2 years ago. We were trying to find out after a major IR had happened on our network, basically how we're going to go back and validate that in production, but not let our SOC know at the same time when that was occurring. So some disclaimers, because I am a federal government employee. These are when I state a personal view, it's my personal view. It's not an opinion of the federal government, DHS, USCIS, or anywhere above. Mention of any product name in this talk is not a government endorsement. And if you have any questions, raise your hand. I have no problem with questions midstream. So about my work. We're the largest world immigration in the world. So we have 8.5 million applicants that we process, 1 million permanent records, 730 new citizens, and of those are military, 7,200. We're fee funded, so we process over $4 billion in fees a year, and over 17,000 employees in over 200 locations and overseas in Department of State's consulates. And we are a leading federal agency in the cloud, besides DOD-IC. About me, I specialize in AppSec, DevSec, ContainerSec, hardening, and a lot of security design. So I assess system for weaknesses in design. I build the risk mitigations and help build the templates and secure by default, and highly embrace infrastructure as code and rugged DevOps for repeatable configuration. Also IPT component representative for DHS cloud migration, which we're going through right now. DevSecOps, which is slowly spreading throughout the government sectors, and the cyber threat intel groups that they're standing up now. In addition, I advise several other federal agencies with the 2 years of lessons learned that I've had at USCIS on the Fed side that are not classified, in using cloud, agile, and DevOps methodologies to perform. An irony was talking with IRS a week before their issue about how to do DevSecOps and configuration control. Prior life, I was U.S. Air Force civilian with DoD Cybercrime Center. I first started there doing workforce development, the DC-3 Digital Forensics Challenge. I did the last 3 years of execution for the program for that. I was at the seat for the U.S. Cyber Challenge. In addition, I was doing DIBNet, so that was all the defense industrial base intrusions being reported in on a voluntary program before it went over to DFARS, the mandatory. Doing tool assessments, later became a program manager, and then security assessment. The one big thing that I did at DC-3 is participated in CNCI5/ESSA, where we basically took the federal cyber centers, NSA, IAD, U.S. Cyber Command, FBI Cyber, Department of Energy, and DC-3, and we connected them together with the first versions of Styx and Taxi with MITRE. Prior life before that, did a lot of IT dev and ops. I did commercial healthcare consulting. I was a former .com boom and bust developer, and also in academia doing help desk. So I worked my way up. Personal philosophies: trust but verify. I know Reaganomics and all that, but this is kind of something that I like. That hey, if you have a question about something, you're questioning it. You should actually test it and see if it does what it's supposed to. Art of war: attack is the secret of defense. Defense is planning of the attack. And my latest one is burn down your technical debt before it burns you, because I see it happen all the time where people will say, oh, it's acceptable risk. And then you'll come back years later and find out no one really knew what that risk was really going to be, and guess what? That's what your IR is today. Our security challenges. Since we're a little bit leading edge, we have a lot of shiny new things. I get a lot of things that are not 1.0 that developers want to use. I don't have much love for Apache Foundation because security is usually sold separately. Incident response, when you're doing agile DevOps. So when you have a pipeline that's automatically pushing to production 4 times a day, that can kind of get a little interesting when you have incident response, because your machines will change out from under you. So you better hope your logs are good. And then the art of the cyber this, cyber that, cyber. So as security, we're usually the last to know. but the first to respond. Acronym Soup. I live DoD life, so I have a lot of acronyms in my head. Sometimes I will use them, so I'm just defining a few of them in case people don't know. APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, aka Attacker. IR for Incident Response. In this context, is typically SOC. TTPs, Tools, Techniques, and Procedures. And SOC, Security Operations Center, which is typically your IR response team in some larger organizations, but some organizations may not have that. So why bother doing a SOC exercise? You want to validate your implemented TTPs for your SOC operate as expected. You want to test the effectiveness of the attack, of course, in a controlled execution. And yes, you do want to test it in production. You don't want to test it in staging. You want to test it in dev, because those environments can act a little bit differently. And you also have the additional environment variables of how that production environment may operate. And in finding your actual defense thresholds. A lot of the policies and a lot of the systems are configured saying, oh, it's going to trigger this alert at this time. And when you do these type of exercises, you find out, well, all these other environment conditionals might push that threshold a little bit back. Now, what's the end game? Air Force is all about bluff, so this is kind of the bluff about that. Avoid becoming whatever major news article. This is about proactive training, so you can consider it a part of your audit. You can also consider it part of your training exercises with your SOC accreditations or your general accreditation programs, especially for the attack patterns. Learning together. So when I first came to USAS, I was managing both the AppSec and also Red Team. So I had the unique ability to say, okay, Red Team, I want you to go after this. Here's the source code. Here's their configuration. Stop operating in a black box. Let's be effective. And also determining where to focus. Everyone has very highly limited resources, and where to reduce those risks of feature compromise or set up additional alerting or remediation tactics. Now, building your team. So the team roles. Red leader, they have the official comms to all the CISO and exercise execution. They lead the team through the exercise build, run, and closeout. It is a process. Gold leader, they're the ones that monitor your chatter on the IR detection. Sometimes you can have them watch SOC, but then you got to watch it because then SOC's watching you. And also recording the outcome of the events when you execute. And then your execution team, typically you want to keep a small and tight team. 1 to 2 red teamers specializing in the particular attack vector that you're going to execute, and 1 or 2 blue teamers that specialize in that particular defense. So they know its configuration and possible unexpected behaviors that may occur when you're going through the exercise. So this is the critical concept. You're testing a hypothesis. You're not destroying your targets. You're doing objective testing of the TTPs. You're assuming professionalism of the targets involved. It's not trash talking them. And if you can, use dummy data and modify benign attacks. That way you can simulate an attack, but you're not doing any real damage to production. And let the results show the actual true security posture. Don't make assumptions. Don't be subjective. This is about being objective, using scientific process. And the purpose is to be detected. That is the whole purpose of you doing this exercise. So you want to run low and slow at first, below your thresholds, to kind of get a feel if you're going to pop then. Increase the noise over time on a dedicated action plan until expected detection. And plan for go beyond expected detection, because a lot of the times when I run these exercises, you have to pump up to 11 or even 12. Another critical. The CISO owns the risk. So when things go south, they're the ones that are going to have to sit in front of the business ops management and the CIO to explain what occurred. They give all the official green light, yellow light, and red light for the exercise run, and they pick the date when it executes in time, because they typically have a better idea of what's the yin and yang of the business operations at the time, especially at the IT ops level. Kind of touched on this a little bit. So you want to limit the knowledge of the exercise lifecycle, keep your need to know at least individuals, space out your execution. Like most APTs, you don't want to do recon immediately and then start attacking. You want to space it out. That kind of spaces it out in your logs, your schemes, and your tools. And then use a trusted comms channel. So typically we like to use Slack. We do a private channel, and we'll do a war room. So we'll start recording all of our recon, our development, do the actual runtime there, and then use that as part of the report recreation. And guess what? A date and timestamps everything, so it makes it a lot easier on the reporting end from a timeline analysis. Anybody have any questions? Do use Slack for right now. Of course, there was just an article in NextGov that Slack might be going away. Major steps. So the process of developing the exercise. You want to do your target selection, determine your expected outcomes. You want to brief your CISO to sign off your exercise day, and then a lessons learned debrief. So through your target selection, you want to state a hypothesis to form a conclusion. When I run attack A against asset Y, then these things should happen. Defense D should trigger. Process P should happen. Response R should occur. Recon your target's observables. I'm very big about sticks and SciBox, so mapping to those. For your ops and your risk, leverage your historical logs for events to timeline analysis, like if you had a prior IR. Determine the target's IT and business ops, lows and highs, so you're not interfering with critical business operations. Research target dependencies and outside TTPs that are dependent upon it. Now, like I brought up before about the IRS, they didn't document all their system and their dependencies, so when their caching mechanism in the IRS mainframe locked up, it locked up 10 other systems right behind it. And I'm a very big proponent about crawl, walk, and approach. I had a previous Six Sigma background when I was in healthcare for their risk management approach. So use a laser-like focus by approaching existing data. Target mission-critical processes first. You want to target the 4% to give you the 50% most pain. And honor the process to build the trust. You have to use that record of success for your exercises, starting out small, to build into bigger projects. And I'll go into that in a minute. Once you do those, you can start reusing some of the exercises to help reinforce that you've actually implemented some of your lessons learned, or tweak them a little bit to push it a little farther. So for a crawl, to focus on a simple rule threshold or a past IR. Example, if I run exercise actions below or at or beyond a no alerting behavior, let's say like a DLP, what should happen? Walk. Coordinate with others outside your immediate security team. Example, explicit permission. We had an inside project called Wild Turkey, which we took a person that was in one of the processing centers. We asked her that we could borrow her user account, and we asked her to stay home. And we used her user account, and her boss knew she was staying home, and we started escalating her privileges slowly over time and see who would notice. And did they follow the proper reporting procedure to call her? And they did. To disable her account, not as fast. And then report it to the CISO. Run complex exercises that can be multi-day. So the typical multi-week exercise where you pivot on one machine and establish a foothold, and then you start using Mizzy-Cats or something like that, start grabbing creds off the wire and see where else you can go, and slowly pivot until you get found. And increase the noise. So here are some examples of how to do a detect. When will we alert, insert attack vector, occurs in this system at this time. Has this tool been configured to operational environment beyond its defaults? What you'll find is a lot of places will just use the defaults, throw it in there, and go. Will this record an audit log? Of course, I have a prior DoD auditor background. I love audit logs. Well, is this event actually recorded as an observable so I can actually mine it out later or build alerts around it? On the respond, did it respond to the attack vector? Some tools say they do things. Guess what? When you put them in the real world, sometimes they don't do it very well, or if they're under different environment variables, they might not operate as expected. Does your SOC report capture those observables? Because that's capturing the skill sets of your SOC and depending what analyst worked on it, or analyst. And will the tool, from the SOC's perspective, log what they did so you can watch their activities? And then all your escalations. Did you follow your IR? Are you meeting the IR response times you have in your incident response plan for that particular system or for the enterprise? And one of my favorites is when a critical person that IR plan is out, like around the holidays, what happens? Does everything start falling apart? Determining your expected outcome. So you got to first develop your timeline of your events, of major actions. Quantify the potential risk to those execution, because this is for the CISO and he's got to sell it to the CIO. And establishing your measurements on those actions. So execute the attack the known defense thresholds, but build your actions to increase over time and exceed those known thresholds. And plan for execution failures and things to fail. Things will fail. Don't execute an attack you've never tried before. You'd be surprised. And always assume and never assume the attack's going to be successful. You're going to have unsuccessful attacks. Sometimes it's just a crink in the wire just because of what traffic's going on. Risk management now kicks in. So to identify the critical operations at the peak usage to whatever target you're looking at. Look at the execution during other incidents. You don't want to do that because then SOCs are already going to be tied up. You don't want to increase their pain too much. You don't want to break an unrecoverable system. There's a lot of those around in federal government, and there's a lot of those in commercial industry where someone set it up, that system admin's long gone, and nobody knows how to work that box anymore. And you're always going to run into some unknown interdependencies because through workforce attrition. Then calculating that probability of that event. So let's just say an action. Threshold T triggers for observable O in SOC tool S1. So the probability is high. We know that it's configured that way. The impact's low if it bypasses that. And we know that because we did recon. And we know it's manufacturer defaults. So how to do the measurements, results of the action. So again, sticks observables, which was previously SciBox. You should be able to map to those. And when you can map to those, then you can start talking about persistent threat a little bit better, and also relating it back to IOCs and other observables. You should hopefully have security events and your security tooling for both your actions and your reactions. And you should be able to query them in your SIEM, hopefully, and hope that and it's also verifying those audit logs are actually getting pumped to your SIEM, because you'll find some systems aren't. And be aware that your SOC may be watching you, because they have access to the same systems. And I've had that a couple times. So use objective measurements. You don't want to use subjective. You want stuff that's going to do basic statistics. Time between actual versus planned. Time to take to execute an action, start and finish. Frequency of an action, and the success or failure of an action. You want to prepare for other findings you may run into. Unusual output that wasn't expected, discovering other possible weaknesses in defense, that happens from time to time, and ensuring documented post-disclosure of the exercise when you do find those kind of things, because they become other exercises, or they have to go into security plans and further research. All right, now you got all your packages together, you got everything developed, now you got to go in front of the CISO. So you need to be clear on the purpose of the exercise. You got to have to speak management speak. So for this one, I'm giving an example. You're evaluating your DLP sensors at location X, so that's limiting scope, on our network that detect PII exfiltration to policy Y. So you're testing your policy to say, hey, this DLP is configured in a certain way in this location to operate to these certain parameters. And explain why this is important. And then discuss. Have a discussion about that action plan, because there will be questions. The CISO has to be able to understand and communicate that up to leadership when things especially go wrong. Sometimes they do. Confirm the accuracy. You'll also help he or she will help confirm the accuracy of your assumptions, because they know the business a little bit better in the IT ops and the leadership chains. And based on their feedback, adjust. And one other here is establish your parameters when you're going to start and stop your exercise. You got to consider the business impacts, IT ops impacts, and any actions that exceed the expected thresholds. Of course, the joke is have a safe word. And then establish everything in writing once you've had these discussions. This is your get out of jail free card. As most pen testers know, you want a written agreement that signs off the risk for you to be able to do that. Require the CISO to physically or digitally sign Print it out, especially if you're doing physical testing, because in case you get stopped by security and start getting called off, then you can break out your jail out of free cards. This is part of this exercise called my CISO. And explicitly obtain exercise days with the CISO. Expect a day to change for the ops rhythms. It can happen. And establish a method of comms prior to go time like we did with a dedicated war room. So the CISO will literally drop in there and say, okay, we're going to execute within 2 hours. Then the fun of exercise day. So you got your war channel going, you have your team channel ready, everyone's ready, and the CISO gives the red leader green light go. We learned after some time, let the CISO sit in channel. One, they'll enjoy it, and two, if there's any other things that you don't know about that's going on in the network, they at least know if it's you versus somebody else. We've had incidents happen while we're running an incident. Report any action of progress, because they're going to want to stay in tune. That helps if there's conflict. And immediately report any unusual observables that you're experiencing when you're doing the exercise. One, that goes into your reporting, and two, that goes into further research if it is another incident. And explicitly report your TTP thresholds when they're exceeded, because that's the critical point of this exercise, is you're saying you should have detected here, but you're really not detecting yet, before you start pumping that volume up to 11. And when you're recording those objectives, make sure you're getting screen captures, photos of the event outputs, changes in the timetable for event execution, individuals responding to event execution. And then document. Then at the end of your exercise, confirm with your CISO on an exercise closure. The CISO may want to extend a little bit further, especially if you haven't hit your threshold rate as expected, and have had that. A good one of that is we were actually sitting in another part of the DHS's network, and we actually had our red team deployed. We wanted to test the policy enforcement points between our component versus another component. We sat the red team over there. We started with a simple nmap. Let's start port hopping, let's start IP hopping, let's see if we flag. Okay, nothing. Alright, let's increase the rate. Okay, nothing. Alright, let's start going sequential. Nothing. Okay, let's hit manufacturer defaults. Okay. See it popping on logs, but nothing's popping. Let's start turning that up a little bit. Okay, we're not getting any calls from any of the SOCs yet. Call up the CISO. Alright, sir, it's already been 4 hours executing this exercise. Can we go full throttle? So max out nmap, let it drop bits, and the phone rings in 5 minutes. Because they weren't watching that particular connection between those two components. That's actually one that won me a DHS Engineer of the Year award. And the DHS CISO had to sign off on 3 POAMs for the entire network. They've fixed it since then. Host a post-op call with the team and the CISO. It's very valuable because then the CISO is absorbing some of that information in case he gets questions from his bosses. So collect your thoughts on the runtime results. That way your team can start sharing things back and forth. Document the lessons learned then during your runtime, because once you're done off that exercise and you start going home and relaxing, you're going to start forgetting things. Discuss anything that was really unexpected, because it may be something else that's roaming around in your network, or it might just be a ghost in the shell of the network. And that initial report, so you create the briefing. I know government loves PowerPoint to death. So your audience, yeah, your exercise team and your CISO, any persons that were impacted by the exercise testing, because guess what? You're going to give the briefing to them to let them know what you did, and they can start giving you feedback of what they experienced on the other side. And assume it's at the exec level in case the deck does move up. Make sure to provide the purpose of the exercise, show the execution timeline from expected to actual results, and keep a tab on live briefings for the Q&A and capture those Q&A questions. It's kind of a lessons learned thing from doing Agile. And the briefing, be interactive. Maintain a blameless environment, keep just to the facts. you typically, as you know from red team sometimes the people that got attacked are a little hurt. Solicit feedback from them, force them to give them feedback. Things that they saw, things that they found that would be unusual, because it may help in your alerting and tweaking what you need to do from your monitoring standpoint. And then propose possible solutions to mitigate or correct those discussion points. Because guess what? Those are going to be brought up later for continuous monitoring. So provide the actionable goals. So leverage the input from the targets and quantify that with the exercise, and then start building that into performance, either at the program level, the system level, or start building in your continuous monitoring or your SOC dashboards and your typical playbooks. Questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Because she purposely told her boss that she didn't tell her boss she went home. So she was supposed to be at work that day, called out sick. Her boss didn't get the message on purpose, but we had coordinated above her boss to let her know that what the exercise was doing. So that created a little bit of confusion. Yes? Right. Yes. So we have taken samples of some of their malware through our red team, neutered it a little bit so it didn't go out and do some certain things, like route it to dev/null, but still let it beacon out, and those kind of things. I'm lucky because I have a really good red team. And the funny part is, because it's a small community, I actually knew them all from the Mid-Atlantic CCDC. So it was kind of a reunion when I came into this employer and I saw them sitting there. I'm like, oh, we're going to have a good time. Yes? So where I sit in the agency is a little unique. So I sit in a cyber defense branch where we own both blue team and red team, but our SOC is actually in enterprise IT operations. So they're kind of separated. So within our own team, we can kind of coordinate that, but when we start needing other resources, we have to go and coordinate with the business or their boss and work that out and keep them under a kind of like an NDA, but it's not really an NDA for that exercise. What will happen is usually that business leader buy-in, especially when you're doing the walk and the run, and the CISO will make that agreement themselves and talk at the executive level, and then they'll kind of work out when that go time is. So I could be told a week ahead, okay, we're going to go on Wednesday, no, barring nothing else goes on. Then Wednesday morning comes up, and it's like, all right, status, check in, and we're still, okay, you're still on in 2 hours, and when that 2 hours comes up, then CISO says go. It's just making sure we're not screwing with prod and we're screwing with the business. Again, remember, we're processing fees. So when we're down for an hour, we're not processing $1 million in fees. Yes? It does for some of them, like the Nmap. Some of them we're happy because we're detected really early. It's like, oh, we exceeded our expectations. This is good. But sometimes you'll find some things in the process that didn't occur because people are escalating above their chain. Yes? Mm-hmm. So the advantage that I have is that I have direct access to the risk management branch, which means I have access to all the system packages, which means I have access to the list of assets. So based on that list of assets, I can make a determination, okay, this is what manufacturer default is for this through a little research or just calling the vendor up, and then taking whatever word that person says and kind of adjusting based on knowing and talking around. There's a lot of history with some of the ops people. And especially on the security side, you have to be partnered with the ops people in order to get your job done. So through some of those partnerships, you can kind of quietly ask around about certain things and make sure you pace it out that it's not related to the exercise over time. But if you're coming in blind, like if you're coming, let's say you're doing consulting, let's say you're not doing FedGov, you're coming as a consultant, you're trying to execute these things, I mean, a lot of this you're not going to find out unless you're going through system documentation or the customer's literally handing you configs. You're going to find out the hard way. Or the customer could be like, well, this is what our policy says, test it to that policy and see what happens. But some of it's educated guesswork. Because sometimes you don't have all the answers for where it's at. Did that help answer your question or no? Yeah, I know. I know. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Well, again, risk acceptance. Anybody else have any questions? Yes. Yeah, we repeat it through process. The problem is that each one's kind of a little bit tailored to what we're doing in our networks. We also have the advantage of being remote, and we have 200 locations we can pop into at any time. So we have a little bit of flexibility there, and we also can kind of hide in some of the larger headquarters traffic so that when we're coming through those kind of lines, they don't easily see us, which adversary has the same methods. Be a lot easier to execute on smaller companies, but not the largers. Because, yeah, I'm thinking back to my healthcare experience where there's only a few of us, and yeah. Yeah. Right. The only way you're going to be able to do that is you start establishing sensors out in the field and then start activating them when you need to do these type of exercises. Or you just literally take over an RDP session on a box. We've done that as well sometimes on some sites. Yes? We try to do at least one a month. Yeah. Plus our annual pen test on top of that too. We have about it's public. There's 110 FISMA systems we have. And of those that are FIPS 199 moderate and high value assets, a good 30, 40. So again, it goes back to using existing data. So either we can repeat a prior attack to see how well we would respond to that, like WannaCry, or you can do particular IRs you've had in the past, like Amazon spill, and then try to repeat that against another team and see what happens. So there's always plenty of material. It's just a matter of execution time. And sometimes what we'll do is we might have like a week-long session where we'll pump out about 3 or 4 of these different scenarios and put them up to the table for CISO selection. Yes? Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Go. My coworker is actually doing tabletop now, because when I came on, I was supposed to be only AppSec, and of course I got other duties as assigned. So he's handling a lot of the red team SOC exercises now, and I'm helping him at the higher level of the execution because he's learning the ropes, which is why this actually is good timing, because he gave input into this deck and feedback. And I had presented this information to the DHS CISO Council a couple times. But with a lot of other attribution that's been removed out of this deck. Good old public affairs. Yes? It's all randomized. Anybody else have a question? Cool. Thank you, guys.